after rising from the ashes of COVID, probably sometime from the middle of next year, by which time we might have a vaccine and people feel reasonably reassured that we can go back to our normal lives, look for jobs, travel in crowded buses, and do whatever we have to do.
You know, Shankar mentioned the unicorns, you know, and I was reading that 18 out of 30 of our unicorns are funded by China. You mentioned Paytm, there's I think Big Basket, Swiggy, Ola. And, you know, there's a certain commentary around that saying that China was investing in the future, in a sense, in the reliance of the future, for example, of India. And that is going to be really problematic because these tech companies in the next 10 years are going to be far bigger and far more powerful. And China is going to have a good amount of stake in them and Chinese shareholders.
Well, Advaita, actually, one has to look at this through the European lens. The European Union passed data protection rights, which every country, every tech company in the world sort of cribbed about, protested, and was angry about, but they put up with it. So investment is only one part of the story. The state's obligation is to ensure regulations, and how we regulate our markets is critical to how we don't allow predatory practices or the Chinese companies from exploiting the Indian market beyond a point, or the Indian customer. I don't think there is a case to say that these investments shouldn't have happened, but how we regulate them is really the issue. China doesn't really have a threat factor over India on these companies. I mean, what are they going to do? They will have to take a huge hit on the equity firms like Alibaba or Tencent or whoever has invested in these companies are not going to let go of their investments and say, okay, we're not going to fund more. And maybe, you know, the American companies, funds across the world, which have about $8 billion, are looking for investments. So there might be a replacement factor there. So the China story, so as Jaggi said, you know, the question is, how do these things evolve? So one of the basic issues, and I wrote about this, UN, WTO, WHO, and all being wailing walls, you know, ailing acronyms. Nothing is sort of happening. And that is because conceptually, after 1945, the countries agreed that every nation has a sovereign right to determine and deal with its issues. So the multilateral agencies have only a limited scope of intervention there. So what is that scope of intervention has to be redrafted now. It can't be what it is in the UN. It can't be the way it is in the WTO. And these kind of political appointments in places like WHO, UNICEF, and all will have. These are causes of conflict. And I think this is the conversation that the world will have maybe in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. But there are much more immediate problems. Like if the lockdown is lifted, how do people go to work? What happens to the real estate sector, which is like literally in the dumps?
Right.
And so much investment is out there. This is the one sector that is at the intersection of agriculture and the urban economy, which provides for both circular and regular employment with migrant labor. These are issues that need to be solved. And how do you get people to work? I don't believe that even the vaccine is about 18 months away.
Yeah.
And there is sufficient literature now which suggests that this may not be the first or the last pandemic that we have seen, because the whole thing about the virus and biological warfare is up in the air there.
So when you say this may not have been the first or the last, you know, up till now, what is being discussed about the virus is that there may be a second coming. You know, at least in the Western hemisphere, the US, they're saying that come autumn, come fall, you'll see this virus reemerge and then it'll be worse. Is that what you're referring to, or are you referring to a pandemic?
So there are far too many variables to determine how the virus will behave. The only thing we know is that there is no definitive definition. There is no way to define how the virus will. The second part is that in the last 20 years, we've had 4 different virus outbreaks. There was SARS-1, SARS-2, MERS, and the American flu thing. So there is an issue on how these viruses are coming into being. There is an issue with how animal protein is consumed in the world. There are issues with how this is getting transmitted. So when you're highly integrated, when you're flying in an aircraft with 500 people, and it takes just 30 hours to crisscross the world, these are all real risks now, which is why if you see the WHO report of 2015, which had the World at Risk report, it sort of says without, so they call it disease X. And they say that disease X can happen anytime, anywhere, and how can the world be sort of prepared for it? And there is no real way to the world can be prepared for it. I mean, we are struggling to figure out how we'll lift the lockdown in India. Every country in the world is struggling to answer that question. The moment you allow public engagement, you will allow public movement. And how do you control that movement? How do you restrict? So there are some models. Taiwan and Korea have done some models, but those are, whether those models are scalable, whether that kind of technology induction is possible in large economies. I mean, how do you determine in 1.3 billion people how many are testing positive or not? And the fact that, and so medical people have questions, forget us, people with science have questions as to whether asymptomatic tests, people who are tested positive but are asymptomatic, who show no signs, are there in the system. How do you figure that out?
And they're supposed to be most infectious in at that stage when they're asymptomatic. That's
yeah.
Else
So
that's
those questions need to be answered first. So I'm not sure whether we have seen the first or the last of the idea of pandemic.
Okay. Jaggi, when will India go back to work? You've done the book on job crisis in India.
Yeah.
So you know how dire it is, but when do you think we're going to go back to work, or are we going to work from home? I mean, someone like me can work from home, but that's not the majority.
See, I think with every additional day that we lock down the country, we are sending millions of people back into poverty and hunger. Okay, let's be clear about that. So we now have to weigh the costs of whether we want more infections and a few hundred more deaths, or we are okay with higher infections and at least jobs being saved. I am now saying I think the 40-day lockdown period up to May 3, I can understand. Because anything in this country takes a long time to ramp up. We needed this 40 days to ramp up our healthcare capacity, our testing capacity, our hospital beds, our doctor and police system, everything that is needed to keep things in order. That is the time period we needed. It is not the time period we needed to flatten the curve, because we have a doubling rate of about 8 to 9 days in terms of infections, which means in another 30 days, we will be at about 400,000 infections, roughly 300 to 400,000 range, right? And if we can lock down continuously for the next whole of May and try and keep it to 2.5 lakhs, okay? But it doesn't help, because the more you lock down, the more you destroy the economic capacity of this country. And once people go back, it is going to be impossible to get people back to work for a very simple reason. The only winners in COVID-18 are going to be technology. And technology is always deleterious for jobs, for the simple reason that you do not have the kind of skill sets where you and I can use technology to keep our jobs, right? Or do entrepreneurial work remotely. But the vast majority are not going to be able to do that. They need physical jobs. You need your plumber, you need your electrician, you need your, everything has to come back. So with every such crisis, jobs actually shrink everywhere. And this has been a consistent pattern I've seen while I was researching the book on jobs. After 1991, the link between GDP growth and jobs growth has been almost completely broken in the West for the simple reason. Earlier, after every recession, they used to bring back to the same level of jobs after 6 months, 9 months. In 2008, it took them 4 years to return to the old level of employment. This time, they're going to take 8 years to get back to the old level of employment after pumping trillions of dollars of money, and the world will still be shaky. Okay, so we are talking about that. No, you look at it as simple thing. Now, let's assume for 1 year, you're going to get used to working in your house without, let's say, domestic help. Or if you're using a driver, you are going to drive yourself, right? Is it more likely that you will hire them all back after a year, or you will keep them in a limited way? Because you're now afraid that they're going to come and infect you. So you're more likely to keep a distance. Say, tomorrow you do this little amount and go away, right? You're going to be worried that your own driver who stays in a slum is going to infect you. So will you hire him? No. So this is the same thing will happen in companies. If you have got 1,000 people working in a factory, and the government says you can't employ more than 50 guys, you have to have distancing rules and this and that, what they will do is they will automate so that they have to use only 50% of the existing staff. This will be the mentality that drives every one of us from household help to.
I think the video is frozen there. Shankar, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. Okay, I think we had a little bit of a freeze. There's one interesting question, Jaggi and Shankar, that's come up, is that Abhishek Chauhan is asking, India had become the most attractive emerging market for global partners for investment in the coming 12 months. As per a recent market attractiveness survey conducted by EMPEA, GOI was aiming to achieve US $100 billion worth in FDI in the next 2 years. How do you see that changing now with the FDI policy?
See, if I may take that first, Shankar also can do that. See, my thing is, our problem is, yes, because of the sheer size of the market and because of the sheer size of the opportunity, people will come. But if we really want to grow, we keep missing opportunity after opportunity. Here you have people want to relocate supply chains from China, but look at what we do. In the last 2 months, we have brought back the license permit Raj. Just 2 days back, they issued, the MHA issued guidelines saying how you can reopen. And they say they're planning to send factory managers to jail or something like that in case there is a single COVID infection in your factory. Now, how can you prevent a COVID infection if the guy is going to go home and come back? And
that's not reasonable.
Follow a protocol and do that. And so, just like you're telling bankers to lend, and then say the minute one loan goes bad, you're going to send the police after you, right? You can't work on this basis. You have to dismantle your regulations. You've got to trust your businesses. Yes, the odd fellow will be a crook. But if you assume that to say prevent one crook, you're going to treat 99 people as crooks, then you have a problem. And if you do not change this mentality, we will never grow jobs. And that is why our opportunity lies in deregulating even now. Even during lockdown is a terrific place. If you deregulate the lockdown, empower people and say, keep yourself safe. This is what you need to do. Factories, this is what you need to do. But don't treat them like criminals if one guy falls ill. You know?
Shankar?
No, I agree. In my first book, Accidental India, I've listed how many times India has missed the bus. In the 60s, the Koreans came to learn making steel at Bokaro. In the 70s, Singapore Airlines came to India to learn from Air India and GRD Tata how to run airlines.
Wow.
In the 60s, we had put out a report saying that we had core competency for manufacture of hardware and semiconductors. We missed that bus. We almost missed the bus on software, but just because 91 Forex crisis happened that we opened up.
Yeah.
So we have a unstained track record of missing the bus. So I'm not very convinced that just the opportunity being there. Just look at the economic math. Yes, we are going to be the largest consumption economy in the next few decades. But how much of the consumption will be left is dependent on how the government manages its regulations, its reforms. And a large part of these reforms are governments, and each state is various. It's like the princely state before Sardar Patel united us. So there are many reforms that require to be done, and how and where we move in. You spoke about unemployment, Advaita. The one must look at is nearly 10% of India's new employment was in the gig or whatever the shared economy. I'm wondering how many people will use Ubers or Olas after this. The fear of that infection from the driver, or how many of us will go and check into B&B, Airbnb.
True.
What is happening to the hospitality sector? These are all really critical issues, and these all depend on science and how they get resolved. So can we devise an Android platform for vaccines of different kinds of viruses? I hope so. I mean, if that happens, then, we have much. But yes, on the face of it, India has a great opportunity. But how we mess it up, I'll tell you. So we
That's
are
what I
all
wanted to just ask you is are we going to miss the bus again? And if we do, why would we have?
So here's the thing, that we have launched a grand challenge for how to devise a video platform to replace Zoom for obvious reasons. Now, how do we do that? We have called for a challenge in typical license large way. We have said that we will give 1 crore rupees to the fund to fund the thing. Why not just leave it to the private sector? Why not ask an Indian company to reach out to BlackBerry, which has the best security codes, or ask an Indian company to write the code? I mean, what is a video platform? It is security plus the camera and a network. Okay. We are going to go launch 5G maybe next month, next year, or the year after, depending on when. So how are we progressing on 5G? 5G requires 5 times more towers than the normal. Are we set up for the manufacture of those things? I don't. Is the government thinking about it? So everything cannot be an announcement. Economic policy has to be much more than announcements. And how are we? So there is Jaggi spoke about labor regulations, factory regulations. There is, in 2018, we wrote a draft labor code. Piyush Goyal put together a team to write it. What happened to it? In 2018, we spoke about a model law to enable farmers to come together as collectives to do contract farming. None of the states have picked it up. In 2015, Venkaiah Naidu said urbanization, we have 3,900 census towns. If they all were put together and brought into municipal towns, we could create so many jobs, smart cities, all of it. Not a single state has taken it up. The simple reason why they have not taken it up is that the moment a census town becomes an urban town, they lose on benefits that are available to rural economies.
Okay.
So our whole system, the economic benefits, is based on. Okay, so we are not thinking of the next economy. We still talk about India being 20% or 30% urbanized. It's probably 50% urbanized. And nobody wants to sort of acknowledge this because it is much more profitable to think we are a rural economy. And what are we doing with the rural economy? We're not doing much about that either. So we have a history of missing the bus, and I really hope that this sort of disruption that we are facing now allows India actually to leapfrog over a lot of its deficits. For instance, in the health sector, if we have a proper telemedicine platform, we can overcome the issue of, my book is coming out next month called The Gated Republic. It deals one chapter. It's basically on India's public policy failures and private solutions. And a chapter is devoted to the health sector. We have just 10 lakh, that is 1 million doctors for a population of 130 crore. And that is like pathetic. So how do we utilize the scarce availability of doctors, of pharmas, of medics, and all these issues better? You have to use technology. We have coding abilities. We have decently frugal engineering skills. We should put all of this together, and that is the thinking that is required.
Yeah, I mean, I am partly optimistic and partly pessimistic from what Shankar said. Basically, I think we have got screwed up our urbanization. We talked about This is not becoming municipalities. Our problem, when they become municipalities, they become even bigger cash cows for politicians who actually milk the city in order to feed their so-called rural constituencies. So why is Mumbai, which generates more than half the country's revenues, is so badly and pathetically managed, and it's the biggest COVID hotspot in India? Why is Bangalore, which has all the foreign capital available, India, Silicon Valley, has such poor infrastructure? Because every politician has his hand in real estate. Shankar talked about a failed real estate. Our problem is we have managed to destroy real estate by making it a pure rent-seeking exercise for politicians. Today, we can actually crash the prices of houses in Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai, or Delhi if we merely allowed higher FSI based on infrastructure, right? Instead of that, what we are doing is we are extending spatially instead of going vertically, and we are actually destroying, actually making land even more expensive when actually land prices should crash, which is the land prices, as you know, costs 50 to 80% of the cost of a house. So we are not doing urbanization right because we are doing that wrong. The second thing I think the optimistic part, I say, is that government has recently demonstrated a certain ability to develop technologies that are of relevance to India. Whether it is an Aadhaar ID system, despite all the what's in it and the privacy issues it brings, it is a great platform. The UPI is a great platform. The RuPay is RuPay is the market leader in India. So when the state, and don't forget ISRO and companies. So we have excellent examples of how government supported institutions have actually become great competitive advantages. Just imagine, similarly, I mean, the iSpirit group has the health stack and this and that and all kinds of things. They have the basic building blocks for what you need to do in various sectors so that you build platforms instead of just different. The same thing can happen in defense. So if we get the government act right in various sectors, we can actually do that. It's not only about private enterprise, because private enterprise essentially means Google and Facebook will own all these technologies. We cannot afford to do that because Indian capital is not of that scale. So you will end up giving all these big companies new technologies will be bought up and sort of financed by the big tech of the world. So effectively will end up not owning these important technologies. So I think it's a good thing if government does step in, but they must have light regulation and sensible support. If they try and run it with a set of bureaucratic guidelines, they say you must do this, you must do that, you will be penalized if you don't use your 1 crore startup capital, we'll send you to jail. And if you don't do this, and if you have one COVID patient, will withdraw all the money. This is stupidity. So we have successes. We need to follow those templates. Those have done well. We need to follow those.
So it's not, so let me add to that, that it's not that the Indian system doesn't have skills. Yeah. I mean, we sent a Mars mission for a fraction of the cost, what it cost Hollywood to produce Gravity, the movie. So we have the engineering skills. About 3 or 4 years back, I wrote saying that India needs something like a DARPA, you know, where have Apples and Facebooks and Amazons found their technology from? They've found technology from investment of the US state into technology and development of innovations. And the two largest beneficiaries, I mean, two largest game changers in the last 50 years is basically internet and GPS, and both are developed by the US government. Similarly, the government of India, for instance, even in this video platform, could have asked ISRO, could have asked DRDO, could have asked others to sort of put together. So this is what I mean, that there is an ability. I mean, Aadhaar came, I wrote about Aadhaar, so the whole process, I mean, it's just unbelievable that in a system like India with all the systemic landscape issues, that we still have the world's largest biometric identity system with over 1 billion people registered on it. And that is the kind of coming together that we need. Even today for health data, I think the Aadhaar biometric. Aadhaar has a QR code which could be used to clear, check, or detain people who have tested. But for that, the people who have the data on who has been tested and who that data has to be launched on the Aadhaar biometric platform. So there are various ways to do these things. And this technology, existing technology, can be leveraged. The point is that the Indian entrepreneurial skill is there. The Indian scientific community has the ability to sort of produce some of these game-changing innovations. I mean, those technologies that are available now with the defense establishments, with ISRO, for instance, ISRO powered its Mars mission on a lithium battery vehicle. Now, for 2 years, government and private sector are struggling to stabilize that technology to introduce electric buses in India. If they manage to stabilize that lithium technology, we could have electric buses. The battery cost would be 1/10 of what it costs abroad. So these are things that need to be worked on and developed. So we have a fits and start system that when there is a crisis, we sort of jump up and then we say, oh, okay, everything is fine. We go back to our business as usual. And, we have a IPC, CRPC mindset when it comes to regulation. If we want to regulate, it has to be a combination of voluntary and punitive thing. We have,
You can't
intervention of companies on dispute redressal. These are things that require a little evolved thinking.
There's a question from Muruganan, who's asking, the foundation blocks of fintech is strong and getting stronger. Is the time right for digital currency?
Well, I think we have an RBI which is suspicious of every innovation. So I think we need to have, sooner or later, it will come. You can't run away from it. Digital currency will come in. In any case, by and large, increasingly India is using only digital rupees to pay for many things, right? Over a period of time, I would suspect that more than 50% of our transactions will become digitally done. Whether a digital currency itself will be facilitated depends on how it is regulated, how it's allowed to come into being. So we have had a very suspicious attitude towards Bitcoin, but Bitcoin, of course, has been very speculative. But you can have a well-regulated cryptocurrency, but no government wants to let go of fiscal power or monetary power by allowing a completely independent kind of currency to exist. So I think it will be a stop-go thing. Like, for example, even in the USS, they have stopped Facebook's Libra because they know the potential of that currency can be enormous. So at some point, people will not need formal dollars. They can use the Libra currency to, when you have 600 million people on Facebook. I mean, even in India, we have some 400, 500 on Facebook. So you can easily transact to Facebook, WhatsApp, and anything and everything without having to use a single currency note anywhere, right? Because the network already exists for it. All you need is a system that connects buyers, sellers, and payers and receivers.
Shankar, you were going to say something about this?
So what we need to sort of realize is that technology will reduce human intervention wherever possible. First, there was cost. Second, there was climate. Now there is COVID. So the 3 C's will now combine and technology will retrench human intervention. Banking as we know today is definitely going to not exist probably in the next 5 years or so. People were marveling at ATMs just as we used to marvel about the STD PCOs at one time. And now everybody is doing most of their payments on the phone, on credit card. So it's already digital currency in some ways. But I agree that the institution of the digital currency is something that the RBI should seriously think about and how they want to. If they don't want mayhem, they might as well make way for that kind of technology to happen. I think that is the way to look at these issues. India has a large informal sector lending system. People lend to each other. Now, this is called peer-to-peer lending elsewhere. This is something that UK has regularized and regulated and benefited from. In India, we have, I think, the 3rd or 4th draft of how not to do P2P lending.
And there's one last question, the audience question, which I'm going to take, is that how do we go from being a digital colony to one that becomes a center of innovation? This is from Srinidhi Muralidhar. For either of you.
I don't know whether we are a digital colony. We are service providers, and that's something that we should not smirk at or mock at. Yes, we have not been able to produce a Windows or a Chrome or a Facebook, but those are necessarily issues that depend on adoption, absorption in the domestic economy, how we get our scale going. So we need to think about it a little like what has happened in the automobile sector. So we are the leaders now in components, in embedded software in cars. We also use a large number of designs and platforms for small SUVs. So that, because the domestic economy could build on it, systems were incentivized. I think if systems were incentivized and we have a larger absorption, we will produce those kind of. The question is, how does the government sort of encourage innovation? The government has to encourage innovation by a very simple, basic template. Here are the 5 problems we want to solve. How do we solve them using technology? That's the simple thing.
And my final question to both of you, and Jaggi could answer this first, and then we'll end with Shankar, is if you were futurists, or if you had a crystal ball, anyone's guess is as good as anybody's at this point of time, where everything is so uncertain. What do you see the post-COVID world being? And it could be in any area, or it could be an overview.
See, I think we move back substantially to a gig economy where we get jobs for a part of the time, and where we'll have to accumulate income. Then we have periods of unemployment. That's something that is going to happen whether we like it or not. It may not happen whether through an Ola and Uber, but it will happen in other ways. Okay, so that's one thing one can clearly expect. That's a trend that's happening all over the world, and it's going to happen in India. We always had a gig economy, by the way, because the agriculture sector is a gig economy. I mean, you get jobs during a harvest time, then you sit idle or go to the city and see if you get a job as a contractor, labor or something like that, and then you come back for sowing time. All those things happen. Now, unfortunately, what is being crunched is higher middle skill, comfortable job sector is going to disappear. Now, this may happen in 5 years, it may happen in 10 years. COVID is accelerating. Tomorrow, will a doctor actually want you to come to his clinic? No, most probably he'll ask you to open your mouth in front of a video camera, and he will look and then prescribe. He might even ask you to fill an online form to give him all the symptoms, instead of asking you to recite it in front of him, where he will be at risk of infection and you will be. So all these things, we won't distance ourselves from customers and all that. So these changes are certainly going to happen.
And Shankar, last word to you.
I think we will be moving into a new paradigm. So a lot of this will be work at home, learn at home, do it yourself. You will also have, I think, the big areas will be education, medicine, courts. Big change will happen in courts.
That's right.
On how issues are addressed online, whether court time necessarily has to be taken up for submissions. These could happen online. A lot of the travel that we see now might be curtailed. People might actually have socially distant but much more effective and efficient ways. I think the economy will need to be much more efficient, and how it is much more equitable is something that governments will have to work with.
Thank you both so much for coming on the first edition of the Power Panel. This is a new initiative. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed, facilitating this conversation between two people who we don't get to hear together very often. So I think it's been very enriching. And we will be back next week on Monday with another topic. I just want to let our people who are watching us know that. And hopefully we'll build a loyal viewership who will appreciate conversation with nuance, with sense, little less outrage, and with people who really know what they're talking about. As a former talking head, it's been my privilege to be part of this and to really listen to both of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Adwaita.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.